Hello, I'm Barbara Lee Diamondstein, and welcome to American Architecture Now. Today we'll be talking to Romaldo Giurgola. Romaldo Giurgola is a distinguished architect and teacher, the one-time chairman of Columbia University's Department of Architecture, a widely admired designer of commercial and residential buildings, schools, libraries, and governmental centers. He is the recipient of architecture's highest awards. A very warm welcome to you, Mr. Giurgola. Why don't we begin at your beginning? You were born in Rome, a city noted for its architectural splendor. How much of an influence was that early environment on you?
Well, I don't think that anyone could pass the influence of Rome, even if one is not born there. Rome leaves in everyone a good or bad experience anyhow, very strong in character. I believe that it left in me an experience that goes back to consider architecture as in terms of the link with the past.
By what architectural periods or styles have you been most influenced?
I think that if you want to call the style of the architecture of the Renaissance, is the one that I feel more interested with and more enthusiastic about, emotionally connected to.
For what particular reason?
I think because the Renaissance developed a confluence into architecture of a great number of elements. The pleasure of living, the notion of places where people were working, the relationship between the building and the city, the attitude toward the landscape and the natural environment. All those factors you found there in that precise language that evolved also through an historical connection, because, as you know, the Renaissance has strong roots into the past, the Roman architecture and the architecture of Greece.
What do you think made the greatest architecture of the Renaissance possible?
The people. In other words, by the sort of dynamic of life that changed the nature of the assembly, the freedom of exchange that took place in the Renaissance, this terrific osmosis that occur in the society at that time, produced these new spaces, new characteristic of space, and so on, to which the architect responded. Brunelleschi, which is considered the first architect of the Renaissance in many ways, was really a man that was working in the field directly with the workers and responding to the need of society in that particular moment.
To your way of thinking, does the contribution of the people still play a significant role in the design of the built environment?
Maybe I'm not so popular in that, but I definitely think so. I think society is the real motor of any kind of new architectural idea. An architect alone, you can see from the house that he built for himself, they are usually pretty awful thing. That because an architect without a client really is a non-entity.
That's a very humanist view. I suspect that some clients, vis-a-vis their architects, sometimes feel like non-entities, to use your phrase.
It may be possible, yes. But what really think that an architecture without in other words, architecture doesn't have an audience, has only participant really. I try since the very beginning to bring into the making really of architecture as many people as possible. I do that in the office by bringing different talent into it, not necessarily architect or young architect or technician and so forth, but people also from different fields.
For example?
I have people from archaeology and technology in particular, but people that come from different areas of endeavors. We found that very helpful in the very beginning to have outside people contributing to that. And the kind of criticism that emerge out of it is very spontaneous, is not articulated by intellectual preconception, and is very helpful in that sense, I think.
What was your first trip like to this country, and what kind of impression did it make on you?
Oh, the first thing that shocked me when I arrived with the boat was a huge advertising that was in the River Drive there. I mean, that was unthinkable from Europe, coming from Europe to see something that takes 3 or 4 blocks as a frontage. So he immediately introduced the country in a very picturesque way.
Okay, you went to Philadelphia and worked with several architects, including the distinguished architect Louis Kahn. Could you tell us, do you feel you learned from his work? Was his most important contribution that of a teacher, a theorist, or an architect?
He was a tremendous teacher and a tremendous architect. I think still has to be discovered as an architect. Has been too quickly associated by critics to Beaux-Arts and those periods, only because he was not biased to Beaux-Arts. But he went beyond that in many ways in his thinking and his doing as an artist, really. Room was the word that he used all the time. He was thinking in terms of rooms. Architecture is an assembly or an association of rooms. And that was a tremendous revolution in architecture.
What is Kahn's role today? Is he as influential as he was at the time of his death, I guess more than 10 years ago?
Yes, I think you will hear talking of him, and you will hear rediscover his value. I think one of the great future of architecture for architects is the development of working place for work, which have never been. See, we assume that an office place is okay, but really is not. There is much to work. If you think about this layer of floors with people isolated in the middle of the building, spending most of their day without looking outside a window or being air conditioning and conditioned all the time, is really not a good environment. And as well as the factory, I mean, for the factory is the same problem. There would be a great movement to develop better place where you spend most of your day.
Can you tell us a little bit about your early working experiences?
I worked for a publishing company, and I was art director of a magazine called Interiors and then Industrial Design. In fact, I was always having in the back of my mind the fact that I was thinking as an architect in contributing to that in some value.
Early on, you decided to become a part of the mainstream and started your own architectural firm called Giurgola, and its very first building received, I guess, nationwide recognition.
Kitty Hawk, or this place where the Wright brother took off, is in the middle of sand dunes and an open field, and it's a difficult place. There was nothing really that could make recognizable the place from a distance. So the problem was to put a shelter for the first kite, motorized kite, as I did, and so we thought at the beginning to make a sort of a gesture from a great distance, and the roof of that particular room became a peculiar shape, so that from a distance one can see that something different is going on there, like a signal with an handkerchief and so on. And so that was the beginning.
So you still feel that the building is a fragment of the larger whole,
absolutely,
and not an object that is complete unto itself.
Right. I think one of the great task of architect in the future is the one of finding again that wonderful symmetry between the element of nature and the man-made element.
Then what is the function of a place in the city, particularly in a city of monumental scale?
You see more in office building which develop this tremendous atrium, for instance, in terms of offering something to the city.
The currently prevailing notion that buildings should pay attention to other buildings, that at long last buildings should be well-mannered and fit into the context, an idea that is achieving wider and wider attention. How important to your own work is that consideration?
It's a fundamental issue, is to establish a continuity so that the city presents itself as history, as a living place, and not as a sort of contest of different kind of thing. I mean, surely New York is quite probably different in that sense, but you see, I never consider New York as an assembly of buildings. It's just one building.
And how about Philadelphia?
Well, Philadelphia is a little different. Philadelphia has a history of that still maintain that kind of characterization of parts, and you can still detect that narrative into the city, and one should be careful about that. And I think in the few things we did, we tried to be sensitive about that in the area of Society Hill and so forth.
You feel that order and the significance of order in architecture is really critical to an understanding of your work. Could you elaborate for us on the architectural function of order, especially within urban environments?
The city developed an order of its own, a kind of body that survived by being organized in a certain way, and it's difficult to disrupt that order. It could only evolve and change, and so I think that when you do a building, you have to be very much concerned of this urban order in one end. By the same token, you have to be concerned of a natural order, or of a geological order, really, in terms of the configuration of the land and so on. Sometimes it's very funny to see houses and buildings which were designed for flat land in a sort of a hill, like you find in California all the time, suspended in the air. That's not fun, really. It's really a lack of sense of order, of sense of relationship with the natural configuration of the land.
Is architecture essentially a personal vision or a joint vision shared by the client and the banker and the developer and now even the community?
Well, I think I would say that it is a personal vision, but many personal vision. There are different perceptions of architecture.
But who has the last word?
Or the men that use the place.
What do you think of what the respected architectural critic Ada Louise Huxtable has said, her assessment of the skyscraper? She has called it this century's most stunning architectural phenomenon. Is that a view that you share?
Well, it's stunning, all right. I don't know if it is important, but it's certainly stunning, because it covered most of the world. Is, we just come from Singapore, and you see this tower mushrooming like nothing. I mean, yeah, it is a stunning fact. I don't know.
It's not one that pleases you, though.
No, I don't think I don't think any architect really likes to do a tall building. You know.
Is there an alternative?
I think I will even ask Philip Johnson if he really likes to, because there is nothing to it. I mean, is it
There's
pure
a top
exploit?
and a bottom.
Yeah, there is all dictated by this speculative idea of taking the lot and multiplying the floor, and you have to get as many square foot as you as you can get out of it.
How does that differ from an apartment building, even a luxury apartment building?
Well, at least in the apartment there is the condition of certain space, certain part in a different way, orientation, you know, there is some kind of, but in an office building, really, there is not too much. All there is the exploit of a certain form. You can make, jazz it up, what is basically is a box. You know, there are pleasant ones. The Seagram, because belong to a sort of way of seeing architecture in general. So it's not because it's a tower. But that's about it, really. The rest is a sort of merging of different kind of ideas, but it's essentially that thing. But there is another issue, though. Truly, the space is what it is, scarce, and you have to build high. And that is a very important factor. But the question is how architecture could answer to that point. And I think the best answer would be to reinvestigate deeply and seriously the condition in which one has to work in this place. I think much of architecture stems from an individual kind of concern, of how one will fit, you know, will make the place really part of himself, how he will be at home into it. That's the real issue. You can say, well, man adapts to anything, so, well, but that's the responsibility of the architect, you see. One can adapt to anything and find out that ends up being a cripple. And there is where you have to take the things in time to really develop the kind of environment that instead make the life enjoyable. Because the real task of architecture has been always to make a better life.
You have won numerous architectural competitions. Your designs have won competitions for the AIA National Headquarters in Washington, D.C., the Wainwright Office Complex in St. Louis. And how did you redeem that close to demolition Louis Sullivan Landmark building in St. Louis?
Well, that was mostly, you see, the merit goes to the public that reacted against the threat of demolition, and then the governor, which really took on his own to buy the building and you know, make a state office building, and then to add the additional part that and I enjoy very much doing, because I think is serving the city very well, is again a fragment of urban environment around this queen that is the Sullivan building over there.
It is a beautiful project. Won't you take a moment and describe for us the really important project that you are working on now, the Australian Parliament House in Canberra, and what were your design considerations there?
This is a parliament, and every inch of that building belongs to the public, of course, and is a place of work and debate for the whole nation to look at. And in that is a pure architectural problem. I think that is where you have to start with. First of all, you have to believe on what happened there. We had to believe in the place, too, and in the particular location, which was defined through some alteration of the basic plan that Walter Burley Griffin did for Canberra, which is an outstanding plan for a new city. It comes, you know, also Burley Griffin won a competition in 1912 to design the capital for Australia. And I remember I was a student and we were studying those plans, and I got very excited at that time and looking at it. Really was a plan of a garden city, but with a tremendous sensitivity to the articulation of the land and the configuration of the hillside and the valley and so forth.
Well, that's an ongoing concern of yours, the relationship of the built environment to the natural landscape.
And I must say, it came very much from Griffin. You know,
So that earlier plan, that 1912 plan, influenced your design?
Very much so, yes. I mean, in fact, we put as a premises in a way that we should make an attempt to continue that plan. I mean, the kind of sensitivity that the public is developing toward their land is a unique factor nowadays, and I think is a wonderful one, especially when the land is not yet massacred by all sorts of construction. You see, architects have a very bad press now because they've been building terrible thing and all over the place. The architect is there always in between the public interest and the particular interest of the individual. He cannot just serve just the individual interest. He just has to be there in between. That is why, you know, it has a value as a profession, and that is why it's in the university, as one would say.
Is there any dream project that you haven't done yet that you'd care to?
Well, I still like very much to work for a place where young people convene, student place, schools, place of learning. I think those are the ones that I feel more inclined to work with. But especially where young people do something. I mean, really search for themselves, for their own life.
That could be an entertainment palace, too.
Oh, yes, sure.
You've written extensively on the work of architects Louis Kahn, and a book on the works of Ilya and Eero Saarinen, I believe, is in the works now. What do you see as their most significant contributions?
One thing strikes me. You see, the old Saarinen, Eliel, brought in Scandinavia the modern architecture in some way. I mean, by reassessing the value of certain traditional element in architecture, the tradition of the place. It relies, for instance, a great deal in craftsmanship, which was a very important factor, and I think that is something that we have to look again and will become more and more an important factor in us.
Why?
Because, well, see, craftsmanship it means essentially an approach to the world of making form. It is basically honest. It has to be absolutely honest because it has to deal with material and follow the nature of the material very carefully. Otherwise, if you start to betray, the thing breaks in pieces, and you cannot afford that in craftsmanship. So it symbolizes somehow the honest approach to work and to labor in general. And I think that is very significant.
If you had it to do over again, what would you do otherwise?
If I had more doubts, probably would have been better. Because both doubt and certitude are making the life worth, right?
For taking the time and doing it so generously and sharing your thoughts and your life and your work with us, our very special thanks to you, Romaldo Giurgola.